can hear me well, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So
Can you hear me okay?
yes, I can. Hi, Nat. We're live. Episode number 3, Road to ETHMiami 2022. So very welcome, special guest. Been looking forward for that. Today we'll discuss modular blockchains, and of course we'll talk about a little bit of Miami and ETHMiami and what to expect from that. So welcome to have you here, Nat.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start the conversation with what ETHMiami is, and maybe I should just share the screen for a couple of seconds to show the website, because people asking pretty much same questions, and I would just rather show the website and what we're trying to put together. We've done event this April. It was like 400 people. We trying to do this a bigger, much better event in November. It's going to be, I think, around 500 hackers or more. It's going to be in November 26th to November 30th, and of course, it's we're doing this with Gitcoin. We have those tracks pretty much figured out. We still want to hear your suggestions and the feedbacks. Should we put more tracks? What would you like to see in these existing tracks, like public goods, DAO, DeFi? You can see it on the website. So join us and let's talk about more of the in-depth what you want exactly to see, because we've done the previous events, and I think what we heard is what we realized, that we need to talk to people more and to hear what they want, what hackers want to see there. So we're fully open and transparent, and we want to talk to you about any ideas, anything that you want to bring to ETHMiami, because we're all about feedback and community. As far as the schedule, we're doing this free Celestia education. That's pretty much the application is over. But now this 4 days of the hackathon itself, it starts on November 26th, and that's Saturday. And then we have 3 days of the actual hackathon, which is November 27th to 29th. It's Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And then demos, awards party, and everything else on November 30th. So that's kind of the schedule. All the information you can see on the website, ethmiami.net. And if you have any question, there's all the contact information there. Please join the community, ask any questions, and we're going to be looking forward to meet you in person on November 26th. Okay, let me remove that. So with that, Nat, if you can tell a few more words, like why you decided to take part in ETHMiami event, what you're looking for, what's your expectations. Can you kind of like give your feel how it's coming together for you?
Yeah, totally. So I think that like Miami is obviously a really great city to do something like this. The only time that I've kind of been to Miami for any of these types of events is that I was there for kind of like a Bitcoin event, but there was a lot of developers that were there that were actually in other parts of the ecosystem. There's also a lot of people that have just moved there from different parts of the country that are developers that are interested in blockchain. And yeah, I don't think that there's been that many events down there. So I think that that's a great place to just have an event. The time of the year is great because it's the winter time and it's cold in a lot of places, but it's still kind of warm actually down there. And there's a lot of great support from the community already with Austin Griffith and Gitcoin and a few other companies that are going to be like helping to sponsor and support this. So yeah, I think all of those things put together, and then just having an opportunity to get together here in the United States is great, because I think a lot of the events that happen are often in other parts of the world. I think like we see DEF CON in Colombia, we've had ETH Amsterdam and ETHCC, and there's stuff that does happen here in the United States, but it's good to have even more. So that's the way I look at it.
And as far as blockchain, I think that was our biggest mistake, to do this bigger event for like 400 or 500 people in April during Bitcoin, because then we realized it's like two different worlds. I mean, like we knew it before, but we tried to kind of piggyback off Bitcoin, and that was, I think, one of the major mistakes from what people expect to come to this hackathon / technical workshop, because it wasn't hackathon, it was just technical workshop presentations, but people still expecting different kind of audience. and Bitcoin and Ethereum, we want to do like a big separation. We're a Bitcoin event, Miami, huge event for like 45,000 people in attendance in May or April. And we just want to do the Ethereum Web3 developers event somewhere closer to the winter, which is November, December. Our Basel time is perfect for that.
Yeah, that too, for sure. The fact that Art Basel is going to be happening, it's just going to be a busy, exciting time to be down there for a lot of other things going on. Yeah, I like the fact that when there's like already some event that everyone's already going to be going to kind of gather around other events, since people are going to be in town, and just makes a lot of sense that way.
How we want to differentiate ourselves in Miami is that there's going to be 3 or 4 major events going on in Miami at the same time, like a women's Miami event. There is a decentral event, but they all user-based. We want really to focus on the hacker-based, builders-based, and I think we are the only one who are actually the only event who's going to be doing the building and focusing on hackers versus just regular conference and speaking. So that's, I think, the unique within all of this madness that's going to be during Art Basel, NFT, metaverse gaming. We are the only ones who's going to be actually building these games, building these metaverses, and building these NFTs that people will use in other conferences. So I think that's been this like uniquely different from other conferences, or not even conferences, events. That's, I think, how we want to position ourselves.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so let's maybe start with your presentation, and if maybe you're going to be presenting, I'll kind of remove myself from the stream, but if you can maybe add this component of what the use cases might be for ETHMiami builders, and how they can use this technology to implement, to build their prototypes, rapid prototypes, projects, then to win prizes and maybe to go and fund their company or start their startup. How they can practically use that, and what they should be doing at the IRL hackathon event in Miami with these technologies.
Got it. Yeah. So particularly with modular blockchains, there's quite a bit of surface area that's opened up, I think, and especially by the time that this event rolls around, it will be another, I guess, month and a half out from where we are now, or even longer than that, right? It's at the end of November. So essentially with modular blockchains, you have the decoupling of all the different layers, and therefore you often have to kind of rebuild some of these layers that typically were all cohesive into a single monolithic blockchain. And with Celestia in particular, you're going to learn more about that in my presentation, but we only handle data availability and consensus, meaning that there's a lot of opportunity to build out different execution environments and make them easy to deploy on Celestia, and all the tooling and all the ecosystems that kind of go around that. There's also the opportunity to just build out smart contracts and applications on different rollups and chains that will be in the future deployed to Celestia. So you can kind of hack on any execution environment that you're used to, like with the EVM, or maybe even something like Fuel, which is a execution environment built specifically for modular blockchains. And you wouldn't have to worry much about the fact that Celestia is involved, because you're still going to be writing the same business logic, the same type of code that you would if you were deploying to an EVM chain, or maybe some other chain like Solana C-Level, because there are even teams that are out there building Move rollups for Celestia. There are teams out there building Solana C-Level and other different execution environments.
Okay, good to know. Okay, so with that, let's get started with the presentation, and looking forward for this. So I'm going to be turning myself off, and then I'll rejoin once you're over.
Okay, that sounds great. Yeah, I can go ahead and get started. I am going to go ahead and start presenting here. All right. I'm guessing that everyone can see this okay, and if not, you can stop me. So this is going to be an introduction to Celestia. And Celestia is the first modular blockchain network. So the first question might be, from that overview, like, what is a modular blockchain? So let's kind of first talk about that. And a concise, I guess, description of what a modular blockchain is would be that it's a blockchain or it's an architecture that decouples the core functions of a blockchain. And those core functions are execution, settlement, consensus, and data availability. And to be even more precise, it is a blockchain that fully outsources at least one component to an external chain. And any blockchain that does that would be considered a modular blockchain. And that basically means that it literally does not do that component at all. And in the case of Celestia, we only do consensus and data availability. And this means that there is no execution environment in Celestia. And we're going to talk about like what exactly the ramifications are of that and what that actually means. But essentially, you could think of it as a layer that allows anyone to post data, and we don't really reason about the validity of that data or anything like that. The execution layers that will be deployed to Celestia themselves will be responsible for the other core functions. So with that quick introduction, let's dive a little bit deeper and maybe talk about why you might want to build in this way and why this is becoming more and more of a popular architecture, not only within Celestia, but within the broader ecosystem, with Cosmos having built in a similar direction as this, along with the future of Ethereum, with their new updated roadmap that has implemented dank sharding and data availability sampling and others. And there are two main, I would say, benefits, and one of them is scalability, which is obviously extremely important. So we'll dive into this a little bit more. When we think about scalability in a software stack or in some type of infrastructure, in the traditional tech stack, all we really are thinking about is like the ability for the application to scale up and down with the number of users, or you could think of the number of transactions or operations per second without the system taking any type of hit in a negative way. So let's say we have an application that serves 100 million users per minute, and then we have 1 billion people that come in on the next minute, and then the next minute it goes down to like 10 million. You know, we're kind of having this ebb and flow of a large number of users and a large number of interactions. We would consider an architecture or a system to scale if that happened and nothing happened to degrade the service of that application. And that's all we really care about in a centralized tech stack. Just we want things to scale. But in the decentralized tech stack or in a blockchain, it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And it's a lot more nuanced than that as well. Because when we think of scalability in a blockchain, we are not only concerned about the service provided and how many operations the system can handle, but we're also considering decentralization, or to be more precise, the transactions per second divided by how many users, or how easy really it is for users to validate those transactions on the network, and the barrier to entry for people to verify this data. Because the whole idea of a blockchain is this idea that anyone in the world can kind of use and interact with it, but also anyone in the world can verify that the information that is stored in that network is precise and actually indeed correct. So how do we achieve this scalability in Web3 in the blockchain network? Well, we typically have users in the system or users in the network running some type of blockchain node. And there are two different types of nodes. You have full nodes and you have light nodes. Full nodes are nodes that allow someone to download and verify all of the blockchain data and execute all the transactions and then come up with the current state of the network. Now, the challenge for running a full node is that it's typically a high barrier to entry, because if you think about Ethereum, for example, you're essentially saying you want to download and verify every transaction that's ever happened throughout the history of the network and execute everything. And therefore, it is a lot more work to be done to kind of get to that point. So therefore, again, there's a higher barrier to entry, and that leads to not as many people doing running a full node. But what most people actually do is that they run a light node. And a light node is a lot less resource intensive because you're not actually downloading and verifying and executing all of the data yourself. All you're downloading is like these block headers, which are essentially kind of metadata that tell you the information that is stored within the chain. The trade-off is that it doesn't actually verify this data. So you kind of have a lot more trust assumptions that are happening with a light node. But the good thing is that it's a lower barrier to entry because there's a lot less resource intensive work that needs to be done to run one of these light nodes. And therefore, a majority of users are running light nodes. But you can never say traditionally that a light node provides even close to the same security guarantees as a full node. And I guess to kind of dive into this a little bit deeper, when we talk about decentralization, you often hear different networks being talked about as far as decentralization is concerned on a spectrum of decentralization. So there is no such thing as true decentralization, in my opinion. It's more about how decentralized something is. So some people might argue that Solana is more centralized than something like Ethereum, and other people might argue that this chain or that chain is more or less decentralized. But what it comes down to is really how hard it is for someone to run one of these full nodes. Because if it costs $100,000 and $50,000 worth of compute or something like that to kind of run a full node, then therefore the barrier to entry is going to be higher. Less people are going to be doing it, and that means there are going to be less nodes running the network, and therefore it is more centralized. If anyone can run a node on their phone, for example, though, that means almost anyone in the world can run a node. So therefore, it's more decentralized. So with that being said, one of the things that Celestia actually does is that it introduces this idea of data availability sampling that enables, I would say, these idea of a full node security guarantee with a light node. And to kind of make that even more, we're going to dive into that a little bit more, I guess you could say, is that with data availability sampling, light nodes have almost the same security guarantees, I guess, of a full node. And they do that via this process called erasure coding. And what you end up having because of this, the way that this is done, is that you have this idea of a trust minimized light client, which is essentially a light client that provides almost the same security guarantees of a full node. And what this ends up resulting in is two really, really important things. First of all, it actually increases decentralization because it reduces the cost for users to operate nodes and verify the network, obviously. Because if anyone can run a light node, and in our case, we've had people run light nodes on a mobile device, then anyone can kind of like run one of these without a lot of resources. So therefore, you have more decentralization, meaning that this network will be very decentralized. But even more importantly, when we talk about scalability, it actually enables more scalability and capacity within the network. While you might wonder how that is possible, well, it is possible because via erasure coding and via this idea of data availability sampling, you have the ability to increase the block size as much as you would like, as long as there are more of these light nodes running within the network. So you can increase the block size and network throughput securely only by increasing the number of nodes that are making sampling requests for block shares. So this basically enables the block sizes to continue increasing without compromising on decentralization. In addition to that, it also enables scalability by decoupling execution from consensus. So to understand a little bit better and dive deeper into what that means, let's first talk about the execution bottleneck. So when we look at most monolithic blockchain architectures, we are using a shared execution environment. When I launch an application to Ethereum, I am sharing this limited set of resources with every other contract that's ever been deployed to Ethereum, along with the users there. If I deploy a smart contract to Optimism or Arbitrum or any chain that is monolithic, or that is a shared execution environment, I guess you could say, we are all sharing the same resources. Now, this doesn't quite make sense when you think about this from the traditional perspective of, I guess, of a traditional tech stack. Because if I want to launch an application on AWS, I'm not going to go find a server that someone else is using and share it with them. Instead, I am going to spin up my own virtual machine, my own server, and I am going to launch my application there, and no one else is going to share it with me, right? it would make no sense if I was like, oh, I want to build the next Facebook. Let's go find a server that someone else is using and share it. That's kind of what we're doing in monolithic architectures. And I think like that's okay for certain applications, but for most medium to large scale applications, to get to the place that we want to be in this whole blockchain and Web3 industry with mass adoption, that's not going to scale that way. So when we think about scalability, you kind of have two ways that you scale a system. You have vertical scalability, and you have horizontal scalability. Improvements at the virtual machine are typically thought of as a vertical scaling mechanism because you're just adding more power, you're adding more throughput, but you're not actually adding more machines or more nodes to the network. You're just increasing the scalability of that environment there. But you know, there's a limit to that what that can enable. Instead, vertical scalability is something that is thought of as a more I guess, scalable approach to solving this problem. And this is kind of a nice visual diagram that shows like vertical scaling is increasing the size of the instance, RAM, CPU, etc. And then horizontal scaling is actually adding more instances. So how do you actually add more instances in a blockchain network or a blockchain architecture? And this is kind of just a short quote or just a short paragraph that says horizontal scaling is almost always better because you don't get caught in a resource deficit. Well, you scale horizontally in a blockchain architecture by having what are known as app chains or roll-up chains. And in this approach, you are essentially giving every single application their own private execution environment for their own users and no one else. So if I want to do something like launch the next DeFi exchange, or I want to launch the next big social network, and I know I'm going to need 100 million users in the future to be on my application, then it probably doesn't make sense to share this execution with everyone else. Instead, I might do an app chain. This is what DYDX has done by leaving the Ethereum ecosystem Kana and deciding to build out their own Cosmos chain to build out the future of their DeFi ecosystem. And this narrative is becoming more and more popular because I think it's a lot better approach because you're still inheriting all the benefits of the improvements that are happening at the vertical virtual machine scalability like level, but you're also enabling horizontal scalability and you're not having to share your execution environment with everyone else. You also have this idea of specialization at each layer, because if we are going to be, let me go back. If we're going to be decoupling all of these layers, then you don't really have as many considerations when you're building at a specific layer. So you can make a lot of optimizations without having to think of everything else that's going on in the system. You also have a lot more flexibility from the perspective of a developer, I would say, in these architectures, because you can kind of like plug in and piece together the components that you want. In the future, I think we're going to have this world where anyone can decide on any execution environment that they want to deploy, and they can fork that execution environment and deploy it themselves, or they can modify it to add different changes that are specific to their own application and then deploy that as well. So you're not having to buy into someone else's implementation. You kind of can build and form your own. And just in general, this whole idea just encourages experimentation, because if we're all forking and building out and changing our own execution environments, then you'll have more, I think, experimentation, because we're not having to buy into what everyone else is doing. And therefore, I think we're going to see a lot more custom execution environments. Another benefit is this idea of sovereignty. So one of the things that Mustafa, who's the founder of Celestia, likes to talk about is this idea of sovereign chains. And sovereign chains on Celestia are essentially rollups that are their own self-sovereign blockchains, meaning a good differentiator between like deploying something on Ethereum versus deploying a sovereign chain on Celestia is that if you deploy to Ethereum and something happens within the Ethereum network, everything that happens within that network, you have to kind of like be bought into. If there's a massive compromise on your application, you're never going to get the network to come together to roll back a change or maybe recover some funds, because the entire network is essentially just too large at this point to do that. But if you have your own sovereign community, you can actually do stuff like that. And with the sovereign chain, scalability and trust assumptions of a rollup, has the scalability and trust assumptions of a rollup, but the sovereignty of a Cosmos chain. So these types of chains share full security with each other. Each chain doesn't have to have its own validator set. And this is very similar to what Cosmos is doing, but you don't have to split validator sets. And what this kind of means is that every community can have their own sovereign community computer, and you're not burdened by the decisions of another community or institution. You kind of can have your own individual top-level social contract, and you don't have to bootstrap your own security from scratch because you're inheriting the security of the network. And I saw a tweet that I thought was a really great overview of what we're trying to do. And it says that Celestia's vision is a marriage of Cosmos sovereign interoperability zones and a rollup-centric Ethereum with shared security. Celestia consensus is essentially Tendermint, but instead of dumping the data on Cosmos, the blocks are being dumped on Celestia. So it doesn't reason, like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't actually reason about the validity of transactions. As long as a transaction is paying the amount to be stored, it actually accepts orders and replicates it. All of the transaction validity rules are actually enforced on the client or on the rollup or on the execution environment. So let's talk about building on Celestia. There's 4 different main ways that I would say you can build. First of all, you'll be able to deploy a smart contract to a rollup that's already running on Celestia. So just like you would today with any other L2. You'll also be able to deploy your own rollup to a settlement layer running on Celestia. So we have Celestia at the data availability and consensus, a rollup at the top, and in the middle you might have a settlement layer that's built specifically for rollups on Celestia. And these projects are already actually being built out, and a few of them are already kind of open source. You'll be able to deploy a rollup with Ethereum as a settlement layer, which is kind of interesting. And this is called a Celestium. This is what we're calling it. But what we are essentially doing is having a smart contract that allows Ethereum to be the settlement layer and data availability and consensus to be, data availability to be Celestia. And then finally, deploying a sovereign rollup or a sovereign chain to Celestia. And this is something you can actually do today pretty easily. And I'm going to talk about how you can do that. So what are some opportunities or ideas to build at this stage? One of the things that I saw someone tweet out a couple of days ago is that 2023 is going to be the year of rollups, SDKs, and rollups as a service. And this is speaking directly to ecosystems like Celestia, because like I mentioned, with all this pluggable architecture, it's going to need to be much easier to do this stuff than it currently is today. So people are going to be building SDKs and services that are things maybe like AWS, where you just go in, click a button, and you're deploying your own sovereign rollup or your own application-specific rollup. This is a list of ideas that was put in our Discord by Mustafa. So I would screenshot this if you're interested in having more ideas, because I'm not going to walk through all of these. But these are just really big brain ideas, I think, from a big brain person that if you're interested in building on Celestia, you should consider. And then finally, just any successful thing that's already in another ecosystem that doesn't quite yet exist. So a naming service or a DeFi exchange, so on and so forth. So to wrap this up, we're going to take a look at some modular stack configurations by first looking at the configurations of Ethereum, because a lot of people already know this. The monolithic Ethereum is essentially just Ethereum layer 1, where you have data availability, consensus, settlement, and execution all being handled by Ethereum. We've now started seeing rollups, and rollups are things like Arbitrum and Optimism, etc. And these are the execution being moved away from Ethereum, and then they're posting batches of transactions to Ethereum. And that's kind of where the scaling of Ethereum currently sits today. You also have some interesting work being done with data availability in different ways already. One of these is a Validium, where you have your rollup, you're still using Ethereum as a settlement consensus, but your data availability is done off-chain. With Celestia, though, a couple of the configurations that I talked about before are also kind of mentioned here. One of those is having your own sovereign rollup, meaning that you are having a chain that is application specific and you're doing data availability and consensus on Celestia, and the settlement and execution are being done on your own chain. You also have this idea of maybe a settlement rollup being deployed to Celestia in the future. This is already, again, being worked on. And one of those that is already being worked on is called Sevmos, but it's going to be renamed soon. But essentially, you have your own execution environment that's being deployed to Sevmos, and Sevmos is acting as a settlement layer in between your chain and Celestia. And then finally, you have this idea of a Celestium, which is using Ethereum as the consensus and settlement, and Celestia is the data availability, and then you have your own execution environment. And this is a nice little diagram that kind of separates these things and shows some of the existing things that are already there in the ecosystem. So examples of modular or execution environments that could be used in the modular stack would be Fuel, they would be Optimism, and they would be some of these ZK rollups. One of the products that we have been building within Celestia that is available to use today is called Optimint. And Optimint is a drop-in replacement for Tendermint, and it allows you to build a Cosmos chains, but instead of doing BFT consensus, it dumps the block onto Celestia. And this essentially allows developers to use Ignite in the Cosmos SDK to build and deploy chains really easily with Celestia. So what does this look like? Well, you scaffold a new chain by using Ignite scaffold chain with the name of the chain. And then you just run these 4 commands in your command line to replace Tendermint with Optimint. And from there, you're kind of ready to go. You can start interacting with the network without much work. So to wrap this up, I would suggest some further reading. One is celestia.org/learn. This is a really fantastic resource to learn more about Celestia. And then the other 2 are a blog post. This is one of the better blog posts that exists, I think, that gives you the vision of what Celestia is trying to do, and it's called Rollups of Sovereign Chains. And then there is a podcast interview with Mustafa, who's the founder of Celestia again, and this is called Disruptors, Modular Blockchains for Sovereign Communities with hacktivist Mustafa Al-Bassam. And this is a really great interview, and I would definitely recommend everyone to check this out. So that's it. Thank you for checking this out. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen now. Hey, I can't hear you right now. Are you on mute?
Okay, yes, I'm sorry.
There we go.
Thank you, Ned, for your presentation, and thank you for joining the road to ETHMiami. I'm sure it's going to be a great event, and we didn't even start yet. So it's every day I'm getting calls, I'm getting partnership inquiries, and I think it's coming together great. And it's just like to have you as one of these Web3 leaders on board is just a big privilege for us. Together with Austin Griffith from Ethereum Foundation, Kevin Awaki, the founder of Gitcoin. And we're going to have some great people coming to Miami at that time to network, to discuss ideas, to see how we can move our ideas forward and implement them in the real world. And that's what hackathon is all about, right? You bring in new ideas, you're talking to the smarter people than you are, you getting these MVPs, and winning prizes, getting funded, working on some VC people coming to fund the project. So I'm sure it's going to be fun, and it's just our pleasure, great pleasure to have you on board. And I'm sure we're going to be making some announcement together as well.
Yes. Yeah, so, I'm excited for it. Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah. So did you get your ticket yet to Miami, or?
My plane ticket? No, not yet.
Not yet.
Wait a little bit.
You better think of this up front. Even though many people they like to buy their hackathon tickets maybe 3 weeks before, 2-3 weeks before. It's going to be a crazy time in Miami. I think a couple of 100,000 people all over the world coming to this Art Basel experience, and you probably should think about.
I need to book my hotel then.
Okay, yeah, I think everything looks very promising and great, and I can't wait to meet you in person this event like again, and even when we've met like what in New York recently, right, IRL. After all this like chain of like emails and text, it's nothing better than just meet person in IRL, and this event is IRL experience that we want to bring to you. So that's yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah, it is nice to meet in person. It was really cool bumping into you in New York. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and again, like we can pretty much talk about everything, but in the end, what matters is your action. So if you want to be a part of that, very simple, one word, one sentence, whatever you want to call it, ETHMiami.net. So that's the call of action. Just go, click apply, and we'll see you at ETH Miami 2022 in November. Thank you, Ned.
That's what's up. Thanks.